In this video, I want to talk with you about the wound and the imperfect nature of systems. So let's first look at the wound. All mythology starts with the one, the undivided whole, the interconnected ecology with the one. But one is, impossibly vast. Where to begin, right? It's completely unconscious, right? Someone asks you a question and you just say one. It doesn't let you into the breadth and the detail. And so the one, the circle, the sphere, is divided into two, and this is the wounding, because this is a mental divide. It's not real, but now you have polarity, up and down, black and white, red and gold, hot and cold, right? You have all the different distinctions, because once you cut the one into two with language, you create the thought of division, right? And once you create the thought of two, you now have the infinite continuum, the infinite grayscale, right? As you go from black to white, you can divide the continuum an infinite number of times, right? And just a little side step there, right? You take a foot and it seems very finite, right? But then you have half a foot, right? Quarter of a foot, right? An eighth of a foot, 16th of a foot, 32. You can just keep cutting any unit, anything in half, an infinite number of times. And if you just keep bringing in the magnifying glass, right, it goes on forever. And so once you have two, you have the infinite distinctions between the two. The two give birth to an infinite possibility field, right? And so you have the wound, and the two is a wound in several big ways, right? By entering into the one through language, we are creating the illusion of an observer and a participant, right? It is an illusion. But when you divide the one into two, you get you and me. You get I and the world. And then within I and within language, right, we start to compose a narrative in language. We become more immersed in the illusion of language. Now, what does illusion mean? Well, we take the one, and with language, we cut it into pieces, and we say that this is a finger. These are fingers, and this is a little finger, as opposed to a big finger, right? As opposed to a thumb, right? So we're now dividing the fingers into that. Then if we look at this thing that we call a finger, in our mind it's separate from the body. Now, in reality, if we cut off the finger here with a knife, the whole body feels painful. Right? That's the reality. But in our mind, this is a finger and this is the body, right? You have the illusion and you have the reality. Now, if the finger is cut off, it can't move. Meaning, in order to be a finger, it has to be connected to a hand. In order to be an ant, it has to be connected to an ant hive. It has to be connected to an ecology that supports ants. The word is separate. Ant, ant hive, pathway, leaves. The words are separate. But one cannot exist without the other. The finger cannot exist without the hand. The hand cannot exist without the arm. The arm can't exist without the rest of the body. The rest of the body can't exist without air. It can't exist without water. It can't exist without space. It can't exist without time. It can't exist without food. The rest of the body cannot exist without the ecology. And yet in our mind, in the illusion, in language, we say that's the ecology and this is me, right? And so we enter the illusion of language. Now, the units of the illusion are composed with the numbers of words used to describe the underlying whole, right? You can kind of look at it in the way a flat screen TV is composed. It's composed with pixels. Now, it used to be that there were 320 pixels. Then there were 360. Then there were 720. Right? Then there was 1080. Then there was 19 full HD, right? Then there's 4,000. Then there's 8K screens, right? 8,000 pixels. Now, the density of language determines the amount of pixelation in our illusion, right? So when we break the one into this grid, right? We have a grid that we use to break up the world with language, right? If the grid is every inch, say, well, then that gives us a certain amount of resolution in our perception of the illusion created by language. If we use twice as many words to describe the same thing, a poet might describe the subatomic particles in a single finger for eternity, right? Because the trillions of subatomic particles move faster than a single word, and so a poet could never keep up with even a single particle. But the density of our experience of the finger described by the poet would be in part the density of language. How long is the poem, right? If you start bringing in analogies and metaphors, the poem just goes on and on and on and never even catches up to the movement of a single subatomic particle, because it's always moved by the time you say the word moved. It's moved 1,000 times. So you've lost reality long before you catch up to it or catch up to the representation of reality in language, right? So this, right, this is the illusion we live in. It is a low-resolution screen that lags far behind the reality of the ecology of which we are a small part. And the nature of ecology is that all things are connected within it, right? Now, right? Scientists, 2 words, 2 illusions within the ecology tell us that once upon a time, there was nothing. And then there was the universe, and poof, poof, right? Magic. then there was something. There was nothing, then there was something. And something was very, very small, less than the size of a single garden pea. But it expanded very rapidly, faster than we can say the word expand. It was expanding. Right? Again, we already lost reality at that point. We can go back in our minds in the illusion of language and say that it was once upon a time this big, but by the time we say once upon a time, it was 1,000 times bigger than a pea, and 1,000 times bigger after that, right? And it kept getting bigger, right? And as you insert a small lens within a large object, you create time, right? Because a small lens cannot see the whole at once, right? A large lens would look at a DVD and see every single frame at the same moment, and then there's no time. But if you put a laser on a DVD and look at just a few little bits of the DVD at the time, then it looks like there's a moment here, and then there's a moment there, and then there's a moment there. Because to create time, you have to have a small lens looking at a large object. And then it takes something, and we create the illusion of time, the word time. We take something to point at this part of the illusion, right? And then we move to this part. And what is that space that it took? First we turned the attention here, and then we turned it here, and then we moved it here. Well, we create a new illusion. We create a word called time. Time is an invention of language, right? It's within the conscious mind that can only look at one thing at a time. And so, because the lens is so small and reality is so big, there is an almost infinite amount of time. And if you just look closer and zoom in closer, you'll create even more time, right? Because it takes something that we call time to look at this little bit, and then this little bit, and then this little bit, right? So the more we zoom in, the more time we create. So we're in the illusion of separation, the wound of separation. The illusion of separation is we're in this small apparatus, right? This construct, this identity, right? And we feel completely separate because we're in the illusion. So we feel separate, right? And every child pretends that God got us all that is, that the parents didn't want them, turned away, that's why I'm separate. I wasn't good enough, right? And so there is the descent from the garden of ecology, the interconnected whole, into shame, into awareness of difference, and into the illusion of separation, which comes with its stories. Banishment, punishment. Why? Why were we cast out? But it's really as we enter language that we leave the uninterrupted whole in order to create the infinite possibilities of distinctions. Creativity is with the wound. It's not with reality. When we pretend that there are two colors, black and white, and all the colors in between, you can create, right? Some of the advertisements out today, 3 trillion colors. Well, certainly if you take the time to name 3 different trillion colors, you've got the illusion right there. Or you can just call it color. Now you've only just got different shades of the one color, right? Or you can slice it up. So this is the wound. This is the separation. This is the illusion. And it is human consciousness. Now, human consciousness exists within the illusion, and the illusion is resting on language. And language is a system. It's a system of interconnected meanings. Right? Little finger is next to ring finger, next to middle finger. Now, why that? Why not binga binga is next to vanga banga? We just made it up. That's why it's an illusion. Right? There have been 10,000 languages, and they each believe in the illusion, and yet one calls it binga binga, one calls it a finger. Right? Which one is real? They're symbols of reality. They're symbols that obscure reality. They are illusions. So the system is partly determined by the density of language, right? How many pixels can you see in? Well, that's your vocabulary and the amount of time you take to express with the vocabulary. And you, of course, create, because the uninterrupted whole is infinite. But you create a rendition by what you focus on, what you ignore, what you zoom in on and linger on, what you gloss over, right? And so the narrative is composed. The illusion is composed. Now, the important thing to understand is that there is always space in between the points, right? Space is the biggest ingredient in the universe, right? Even in our house, right? There's a thing there and there's all this space, right? There's an infinite amount of space. Most of reality is this thing called space, right? And there's a lot going on in that space that we don't see. But here's the important thing to grasp in the understanding of systems. Our mind goes uncomfortable, anxious, and then unconscious as the system gets too big, too complex. It's like, that's just too much for me. So you break it down and you create a simple symbol of a more complex system. You say, this is a triangle. Right? Reality is a triangle. Human beings are a triangle. You have a heart. You have a mind. You have a body. Now, we're leaving reality already, right? Because we know that the body produces feelings, and we know that feelings change the body. Right? We know that thought produces feelings, and thought changes the body. We know that the body changes thought, right? If the body goes up, the thought says that went up, right? And so they're interconnected, but right, we pretend that they're separate. But we have a nice, simple system. You have a heart, you have a mind, you have a body. You got it, right? And you say, okay, yeah, that thinking thing, that's your mind. Oh, okay, I got that, right? So now you have this nice little illusion. It's very, very simple. It doesn't go into the infinite complexity of how they're all intermingled or how the mind today links with the mind. No, that's too complex. That's too complex. So we identify, the I, the ego, identifies, attaches to models of reality. We have our nice little triangular model here. Very nice, right? We're not overwhelmed by it. It's so simple. But it's, of course, not real. And because it's simple and because it's not real, there is anomalous data. There's stuff outside the triangle that doesn't fit into the model. That's out here. That's out here. Right? We say, I am a heart, I'm a mind, I'm a body. That's me, says the ego. Says the I that attaches itself to a model created in language. But out beyond the model, there's all of reality that is also us, but that we cannot be conscious of because it's too overwhelming to grasp. And the I is frightened of dissolving back into the whole, into the sphere, into the chaos, into the one, because it will disappear. The I disappears. If the model gets bigger than the I can grasp, I don't know who I am, and then the I is lost. And the I holds on to being an I, right? This is me, that's not me. This is me, that's not me. This is me. You're getting too close to me, right? I might not be me. If you get too close, I'll change, and then I won't know who I am, right? So the I becomes attached to the model of reality, to the illusion, and fights with the larger reality that doesn't fit within the model. Because regardless of whether you have a 360p pixel screen or you have an 8K screen, there is an infinite amount of data that does not come through the screen's model. It isn't big enough to capture what's to the right? See? The screen stops with the model. You stop being conscious here. But most of reality is out there. You can't see it because it's outside the model. It's outside of language. It's outside of the box. But most of reality, and thus most of you, most of all that is, of which we are a part, is out there. And that means it's in the unknown, and that means that's where the ego doesn't exist. And I know who I am here, but out there, I don't know. And I'm afraid of the unknown. I'm afraid of no longer existing, says the I, right? So we cling to our model. We cling to our model, but most of reality is out there. And so we have our system, we're very happy with it. And if we can get everyone to agree with our system, this is the facts, my facts, the facts. We're going to get everyone to agree. It's so much simpler, right? We'll all get to not fear not existing anymore. We are not terrified of just ceasing to be. But in order to hold on to our model, we have to fight the data, the information, the patterns of energy that don't fit in it, right? So this little thing comes here and it's outside the model, right? So you have to distract from that. This person says, well, what about this? And you say, don't, that's not important. Just get rid of that, right? And what about this? That's your model doesn't account for this. That's not important. We have to get rid of it, right? Or if we're really frightened, right, we may have to say that has to be killed, right? Kill the people. They're bringing all this, they're ruining the model, right? They're ruining the illusion, right? And people have been creating models ever since there was language, right? So you have a triangular model, but this other person, they have a square model, right? The other says, no, that's not good enough. We need a nice model like this. Now, the only requirement is that it's simple enough that the conscious mind can grasp it without getting overwhelmed. Now, here's the tragedy, right? The culture usually lags, it lags at average point, right? So half of the culture is ahead of the model of the culture and understands things that the rest of the culture hasn't caught up with, right? So the culture exterminates, violates, discounts, dishonors the parts of its minorities, right, until it catches up. And by that time, there are other parts, right? And so every system, other than the uninterrupted whole, other than the unconscious, other than the sphere, the one, every system is an illusion. Every system creates division. Every system is imperfect, and it's ultimately not real. And every system causes pain. Because regardless of how complex it is, regardless of how symmetrical it is, and certainly complex symmetrical systems cause far less pain than asymmetrical simple systems of extremism. But even this beautiful system here, right, it's getting very close to the whole. It's getting very close. It's not leaving a lot out there. There's still the part of the self, the part of reality out here that says, why have you cast me out of the garden? You're creating a nice illusion in here. Why is there no room for me at your table? Right? We say, no, can't be done. This is the system. We got to hold on to it. We fought for this system. This is the way the system is. It's the only way. We've got to fight for it. Get out. We've got to keep you out so you don't fit in the system. Get out, right? The scapegoat, the outcast, the outlaw is that which is thrown out of the model, right? A new science develops, and the old science says, no, that doesn't fit in our model. You're not a real scientist. And the new scientist said, no, you're not the real scientist. You don't have room for this data in your model. You've got to throw the model out. There isn't enough room in your little petty model for all this data, right? There's this and that, and you can't fit any of that in your model? It's not a very good model, is it? Right? Right? And then the new scientists come in and throw the other scientists out, right? They're outcast now, right? And so this is the war, right? The war of human consciousness. It's not the war of reality. This is the war of human consciousness, right? I don't want to go into that because it's confusing. I don't want to go into that because it's chaotic. I don't want to go into that because it takes me outside of my identity. My pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being is based on this model, not on that model. This is the way it should be, right? And how do you respect another person's model when it casts out part of who you are? How do you respect yourself while living a model of reality that outcasts large portions of yourself, right? For example, the Western model of materialistic happiness casts out its ecology that it depends on, right? And this is always the trouble. The model depends on what it cast out. It rests on the foundation of everything. Every possibility within the possibility field rests on the foundation of the possibility field and is the smallest part of the possibility field. Right? The possibility field is infinitely large. Just give it enough time and space and you can create anything. The possibility field is infinitely large. Every single possibility rests on the foundation of the possibility field. And every single possibility is the smallest part of the possibility field. Because it is one possibility amidst trillions of possibilities. So it's just one out of trillions, right? And it is the arrogance, the humor, the joke of the ego, the I, that as one possibility of language, there have been 10,000 cultures, 10,000 languages, 10,000 belief systems, and time keeps creating more. Over the next trillion years, how many more cultures, how many more languages will emerge out of the possibility field? on this planet, on that planet. Just give life enough time and space, and every possibility will come into being. Right? But for now, there's one. Right? And the epitome of arrogance is to occupy the one possibility and deny the 99.9% of possibilities that you rest upon. To elevate the one over the whole is the epitome of stupidity, of egocentricity, of blindness. Because I see me, so, right? But I don't see everything that could be, or that was, or that will be. Right? So I elevate what I can see within my illusion above everything else. And in elevating, you have disrespect. Respect is to look and to look again. Spectacles, to see, to look and look again. That is, right? That is humility. That is respect. And when you respect something, you don't violate it, right? If you see the concrete pillar, you don't drive your car into it. If you disrespect the concrete pillar, you also disrespect your car. Because when you refuse to acknowledge the pillar, it's not just the pillar that gets damaged, it's your car. And it's you in the car, right? So when you disrespect something, you violate it. You don't attune to it, and so you hit it. When you hit something, the impact is always mutual. Maybe more one, more the other, but it's always to some extent on both sides. So to disrespect something is to become blind. To become blind is to create violence, violation. And the violation is always mutual, right? If you punch something, your fist is also punched, right? Now, which is worse, right? Your broken knuckles or the broken jaw, right? The intensity of the violation determines the intensity of destruction, disintegration. So this is the crisis. This is the human crisis. Human consciousness exists within language, which is a system. The language exists within a cult or culture, which is a system of values and value hierarchies. That system precludes all of the other systems. It obscures them. And we elevate our cult above the other. We elevate our cult above the other, and in doing so, we dishonor the parts of our possibility, the fact that we could have been like them as well, or like them, or like them, or like them. That they're just different expressions of the possibility field, of which we are all a very small part. The human brain, the human consciousness collapses under the overwhelming complexity of the ecological whole and goes unconscious, cannot keep up. And so it must refract the one, the circle, into a system. The system creates outlaws, outcasts, anomalous data that doesn't fit within the system, but which the system still depends on. Right? You can kind of think of it in geographical terms, like in, you take the United States, and it's broken up into a system of states. The system isn't real geographically any more than it's real linguistically, right? It's just another language, right? But in California, right? In California, there are rivers that flow to and from California from Utah. If you really try and take California out of the globe and pretend it's completely separate, well, you have to slice. Where do you stop? Like, do you slice it all the way to the molten core of the Earth? Like, if you took a bit of the Californian molten core of the Earth and took that whole thing and took it out into empty space, well, now it doesn't have an atmosphere. It can no longer survive any more than the pinky without the hand, right? If you block the wind from traveling on the state line, if you block the stream, like the pollutants that go in Utah come into are polluting California, right? Because nature is not part of the joke that is human consciousness, right? Nature understands that all things are connected. Life is interconnected. But when we cut it up into lines and words, we create these weird ideas that don't work, right? You think you can destroy the Chinese economy and not affect the US economy? Well, then they're connected. So then why are they being labeled differently if they're really part of one thing? It's for the convenience of language, so that it makes sense, so that it's simple enough that we can focus on one little part of reality at a time, right, at the expense of the other. And yet our war with ourself, with reality, with the psyche, with the possibility field begins the moment we say this is the line. Right? We are a democracy. We are not communists. Okay, so now the communists are the outcasts. So there's a war. Right? What if there was no word? Democracy, communist, then there's no outcast, right? But then what is that, right? The I, the identity, we seek a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that's me and not them. And so the war begins. The great crisis for the self, right, is the ego is constantly chopping the one into bits, creating pain, believing in the separation more than in the interconnectivity. Right. Every human body that, when it's dead, returns to the underlying ecology. Every human body emerges from the underlying ecology. And every human body depends moment by moment for its ecological connection with time, space, water, air, nourishment, heat. It's completely interdependent. Right? And yet we hold on to this fixation, right? So this is the crisis. This is the tragedy. This is the grief, right? To have the creative possibility of making a video like this, right? To be able to use language as a poet, we must cut the one into bits with words and reconfigure them with words. And in doing so, we create outcasts. We create the illusion of separation. And this continues as long as we believe our lies, as long as we believe the words, as long as we believe in the separation, in the illusion, in the model, more than we believe and experience the whole, we will be separate. We will be in battle. And that battle will create awareness and insight, right? Create conflict and confusion. And that is the human condition for as long as we're here.